So good morning. I am Brian Matthews. I'm Associate Dean at Carnegie Mellon University. And today I'm going to talk about the way we organize information, the thoughts we have, the ideas, the tasks, the projects, all of it really kind of impacts and shapes like what we can do, how we do that, and what we can create. And I think even further, like the way we feel about all that, like the way we feel about the way we organize things, the structure of it, the aesthetic of it, the flow of it, all that really kind of impacts what we can create, how we can take action. And so I'll put that over here, to start with that idea. And then there's this prompt that someone gave me that has kind of haunted me maybe for a few years, but it kind of goes by, what if the way we manage our information reflects or mirrors the way we manage our lives, right? Big question with that. And so we're all friends at CNI, right? So I've got myself into situations like this where, I don't know. I think it's kind of a leadership kind of thing, but there's just certain days and weeks and months where you just have this collision of notes. This is actually during COVID time, so I'm on my laptop on Zoom all the time, like all of us, and I didn't want to like type on my laptop, so I'm like taking notes, and I end up here. I'm addicted to ideas and a compulsive note taker, so I've been working on that. And I've wanted to always take an engineering approach, right? I think that if I could just find the right system, the right framework, I can take all these inputs, all this, talks like what we're experiencing here, the things we read, the conversations in meetings, all the input that we have, and then do something with it, right? We create output. So we're having more meetings about it, or we're kind of launching proposals or projects or writing papers, or even just developing opinions or points of view on things like AI. How does that sort of evolve and shape? So what happens in that middle space? That's where I've kind of always struggled, and I've read all the books. I'm addicted to all the books, and I'll continue to read all the books. But again, I think that no matter what happens, I end up here. And it's always it gets serious when it gets into like Post-it notes. Then it's like, Keith isn't here, but for our CMU community, our boss likes to give us a lot of interesting things to do. And so there's just things kind of accrue, there's things and so when it gets serious, it ends up being drawings and sketches that I can't read a week later, or, whatever happens. And so over time, what I've realized is I need to think more like an ecosystem rather than an engineering framework. And it's kind of abstract. We'll start abstract with that. But it's really like, how could I have this fluid approach to all the stuff I need to do, that processing that could change or adapt throughout the semester, throughout the week, throughout the year, with the seasonality of that during peak times and I was going to say slow times, but during more productive times, we'll kind of say. And again, how could I kind of be adaptive with it? And I think a big part was I didn't want to just take notes. I wanted these notes and ideas and all the things to somehow connect with each other. So I tried all the apps and all the systems as well. I landed on Obsidian. This isn't a promo for Obsidian, but it just worked for me. I think aesthetically it was kind of cool. I had a lot of control of that. So when you put all this together, like I started to have like a philosophy, and I had a environment, and I think in a very like Carnegie Mellon sort of way, I needed an operating system. and for me, I found that through a guy who's become my friend. His name is Nick Milo. He has a lot of YouTube videos on Obsidian. Hence, he runs some cohorts on that. He's working on a book to add to that list of books, as well. But I grabbed some of his images, and just to kind of share a quick view of this. We have all these notes. You saw on my desk, all these notes, digital, paper, all these things, and they kind of bubble up and they turn into a note of some sort, whatever, agnostic in that kind of sense. And what I wanted to do was thinking about this ecosystem as like an integrator, right? So I could look across my notes and see like, okay, which notes are talking about AI? Which ones are talking about, X, Y, Z, whatever that is. And so it was kind of this, not just a pile of notes or a storage of notes, but it's somehow activated. And so I could look at things like this. Like I could look at things like, digital publishing or digital scholarship or open science or data services. And I could look at some of the topics that Cliff was talking about yesterday with like infrastructure or preservation, and being able to look across the connections between these things. That's what I wanted to be able to do and what I've been working on. So in short, I've been trying to take this idea of notes that are sort of integrated, but and activate it, and that it could also, my system could be like a facilitator, for lack of a better word, where it could help me assemble things. What are, all my notes about AI? How could I have them sort of talk with each other or collide or argue or agree? And then unify into like, okay, here's where I think about AI right now. Ask me in a year, it might be different. Ask me in a week, it might be different, maybe. But it gives me that kind of capability. And I think the real like proof of concept where I became a believer in this was on the idea of artistry. We were talking about this last night, but I'm not actively trying to do anything with artistry, but it kept coming up in conversations. And I put in here, there's like this slow accrual of notes. And I'm sharing this not to like be able to read it, because you really kind of can't, but I'm trying to just visualize it where I'm not actively developing this, but I was talking with a developer that reports to me, and he was talking about the artistry of writing code and how only other coders could appreciate his artistry. Or a friend of mine who plays flute, and she was talking about the difference between like playing the piece and having mastery and artistry of it. Even though the notes are the same, there's something different. And you got a lot of Rick Rubin stuff in there. Like there's a lot of different areas where artistry is bubbling up, and I could do something with this right here, and I haven't even tried to develop it. So imagine doing that again with like AI or data, pick a topic, that kind of thing. As you kind of have these notes over years, this has been about a 2-year project of mine, about 3,000 notes. It's kind of like starts to sort of accrue. So basically what I'm trying to say, the visual here is like going from like this to building like thought maps is the way I'm kind of getting that. So what are those kind of communities of thought? So again, this is my AI. So this is again 3,000 notes in here, and these are sort of my AI notes. I just did the visual for today on this, but I could visualize this in other ways. I can get lists. I can do different things with that. I can also look at people. Like I have a meeting with Jason next week, and we're going to talk about different things. Like I could come back from this trip and see like, okay, what have we been talking about? What projects are we on? What do we want to wrap up for the year? I would have a lot of that. All my notes that have he's tagged on, I can kind of look at that. I can read a book, and I can connect that book to other books or podcasts or whatever the universe of notes are. So you kind of start to have these, I use the term like neighborhoods or intersections, which is kind of cool too, where you can kind of see, here's this book, it's about strategy. What are other things of strategy? Do they agree? Do they complement each other? Do they contradict each other? Whatever. So that to me was like the beautiful kind of opportunity here. But you can also create these interfaces, if you will, or entry points, where this is like something instead of having, here's a bunch of notes and they're chronologically done, I'm able to look at, like this is what I created for the spring, like a little interface that get me into, here's the meetings, here's the priority projects, and so on. This one, again, you can't read it, but I'm just showing it more for visual of, here's a book that I'm working on, and each of these boxes is sort of it could be a chapter, a section, it's in development still, but I can kind of move things around. I can look at the landscape of the work and just kind of get that visual sense. And underneath it all, there's pages of text, but I can also see those maps. I can see where different threads are connected, to it. And so, long story short, this is kind of building up. It's kind of a hybrid, I guess, of like an engineering and a biological kind of combination where it's this organic kind of system. But it's not for me just obsidian, and that's the point I want to get across. It's like this very inefficient but effective tool for me. And as I talk to other people about this, like you kind of see a lot of people have a different constellation of tools or processes, or they don't. And that's another time we can talk about that. But it's this constellation of tools that work together in different ways, and that's very organic. Like you have to develop it yourself. Like I could give you my approach, but it probably wouldn't work for you and your habits, because I think we have that unique thing. And so I kind of, like I said, I've gotten pretty obsessed with this and met a lot of other people who map their sort of systems as well. This is a friend of mine from Canada, and Cameron, and he's finished now his degree, but again, he's using different tools as his inputs. It's working through a pipeline there, and then he has his outputs where he's writing code, he's giving talks, he's working on a thesis. This one is, you can't really read this one. I can't even read this one, but I'm showing it more for the complexity and obsession of it, where, this is Sophie. And what's interesting about her sort of map is she has her inputs. Her outputs are really focused on, there's a lot of academics that she's doing, but she's also writing songs, she's writing sermons, she's doing very elaborate journaling process too. And so her flow of information is mixed in that kind of sense. And so I kind of started discovering that, people have these complex relationships with their information, they're organizing it in different ways and producing things in different ways. And around this time, I was also started working a lot more with robotics. I think we did a CNI talk on that 2 years ago, maybe. I don't remember how long it was. But we did a talk on that, and I started talking with a lot of different PIs and students in labs, and really kind of understanding like what goes into building a robot from a knowledge management point of view? What are all the parts and pieces and so forth? And beyond the robotics, like just talking to people who are working on dissertations or working on sort of interdisciplinary research, we'll kind of say. And it didn't seem to matter the discipline, like the same kind of themes came up in the really informal conversations, but looking at really finding and defining the problems and gaps in these interdisciplinary spaces and sort of synthesizing, but navigating the language barriers across fields and across global contexts, disconnect between workflows or like different tools that people are working with were incompatible, open problem, Saeed. I think how to do lit reviews, but also how to keep them up to date, how to share them. And then even this sort of sustaining knowledge where someone comes in and then they leave a lab or they leave a group or they graduate or things happen, and like what happens with that information. And so long story short on this, I started mapping out something where, like, from a knowledge management perspective, and I love my metaphors, but I try to think about it from what are these kind of layers that I kept hearing from people that would be useful if I'm joining a lab or an institute or a center or a research group or a project, like being able to kind of have like all these kind of things, like what are the foundations? This is more kind of STEM heavy, but it's like, what would be those foundational papers? What is that sort of assets in terms of code and data and so forth? What's that sort of a network of people locally, but even on our radar, the potential partners or collaborators or other people doing interesting things in our space, a discovery layer and on and on, even into like thinking about futures. We have I used to say we had an election coming up, but we have a transition coming up. How does that impact, if it does, like how does that impact what we're studying? And so I took all this and I presented it over the summer to a group of like a team science conference, and they're like, this is really cool, but we want to see it, build a prototype. And so I built a prototype, and I'm kind of I'm treating it very startup mode where I built a prototype. I've shared it with a few PIs over this fall, and in the summer I'm going to share much more. And it's less about this exact prototype and more about, tell me more about the information and practices that you have. And I think when you talk about that abstractly with people, it's kind of whatever. But when I show them a prototype, then they're like, oh yeah, this is how we do that, or this would be interesting here. It makes it more textual or contextual, I guess, for them. And so I'm not gonna do a live demo. It won't work. I can barely do PowerPoint on this kind of thing. So let's just, if you want to see a demo, I'm happy to like sit down with you, here or on Zoom sometime and walk through it. But I took some screenshots to just kind of show you that just the flavor of it. What I like about Obsidian too, again, you don't have to do Obsidian. You could use Notion or you could use another platform, but I like Obsidian for the aesthetic control, where I kind of created a totally different. Mine's very dark, this one's very light. Again, taking those layers. So again, it's this idea that at CMU we don't really do a lot of biofuel, so I felt it was a nice neutral platform to build on that, to demo that, and it's worked in that sense. But I can come in, I can get up to speed on like, okay, I'm joining this lab or this center or this entity. What's going on here? I can kind of get a list of like, okay, what are the thrusts or the themes or the threads that we're working on? And you can open that up and get like, okay, here's this conversion technology. These are the main questions we're working on. Here's these kind of things. So I can kind of quickly get up to speed. If I'm joining a lab and there's 10 students in there and they're all doing different things, it gives me a chance to see like, how is it all connected? What are we kind of doing? What am I kind of bringing into it? I can look at different assets as well. So I can kind of see like, what are the data sets that we're kind of using or creating or, whatever, the code or whatever, and link out to that. There's like a little metadata record just for show. And again, this is more to get a reaction to see how do you collect, how do you do data management now? You can bring in those kind of conversations through a demo kind of differently than talking about compliance or something like that. Being able to bring in futures and trends and things like that. Again, our dean is very invested in this area. Some of you did the AI workshop that he led over the weekend. You kind of see, but again, thinking through different scenarios where if we're in biofuels and there's the Trump administration is coming in, like what stance might there be on like renewable and bio, like how will that impact energy, and being able to have like a report in there that kind of shows that. Maybe we're working with international. Maybe we're, maybe it moves more to aviation. There's different ways you can kind of predict the way things are going to happen. So being able to, like, again, I'm joining a lab, I can see what's kind of going on in this space. This is where it gets really kind of interesting too, and using a little bit of AI in this way, but being able to take all the terms that are kind of highlighted throughout this thing and be able to translate them in different contexts. So this is looking at, like, here's a technical definition of this thing. Here's an interdisciplinary definition. How do we kind of look at different ways these terms connect? And this is a thing that a lot of, particularly the PhD students I've shown, have really kind of connected with this one. It's like an ontology. So if I'm like, I'm really into ethanol and I really need to start working on biodiesel, like I can like look at it and compose and see, like, okay, here's my process that I'm familiar with. Here's these other processes that are doing that. How are they related? How are they different? How are they whatever? Is there things that we can kind of look at? Here's this third process that we're not using yet. Maybe we can learn. So it really kind of puts it in context of seeing all of them create greenhouse problems. So like, how can we attack that? How can we look at it all together? And again, it's all linked back to, like, here's literature, here's data, here's all the things. And this is like, it's really kind of, it doesn't look interesting, but philosophically, this is amazing. This is really a line of code right here that basically just says, if I'm looking at the thing of biodiesel, it's kind of saying, look at all the notes in this folder, in this packet, we'll kind of say, we call it a volt. But look at this volt. Anything that's kind of tagged in a certain way with the metadata of biodiesel, and give it to me alphabetically. And so it's kind of like, again, if I'm an ethanol person and I want to see, like, what do we have going on in biodiesel? Who are the people in our lab that are working in this space? What grants are we in? What data? It brings all the kind of things in a very organic way. So as things come and go, that'll kind of come and drop. It'll reach out to different papers and so forth. So again, what I'm kind of looking at is the knowledge management piece, but it really kind of looks at these bigger ideas. When I talk with particularly a lot of the PIs, they get really excited about the whole thing. And I wouldn't prescribe anything, because again, I think people have to, like, you have to kind of compose your own solution. But again, you start to see, like, how could there could be a common set of tools that integrate with each other and complement each other and do, sort of different things. And so it's kind of moving from a little bit of an ad hoc, what I hear a lot with particular faculty, but sometimes with postdocs and so forth. It's like, we just kind of started this thing. We don't really know why we're using this tool, and this isn't efficient, so being able to kind of back out and look at the whole ecosystem to see, like, how could information flow? I'm gonna do a quick demo of Litmaps, which is kind of like my favorite my most interested AI tool I'm interested in right now, but I think it really connects with this because it all connects through, like, Zotero and Obsidian and on all this, where I can kind of, I built like a collection of about 600 articles on, like, water scarcity. And then I've tagged them all based on things like residential or agriculture, different thematic pieces of that. So that's what the colors are different things. And the beautiful thing about this, again, it's all dynamic in Zotero, so it can live throughout that, and it can push into the other platform like Obsidian and other things too. But the beautiful thing here is you can kind of, like, click on any of your sources, and it kind of shows you visually how it's connected, to these different areas. And the cool thing is being able to see the colors, where you can kind of see, like, okay, this is about agriculture, but it's also impacting, clean water or these different things. So you can kind of see the interconnections between your literature, but you can also see, here's some things that they're not in your pile that might be useful to you because all these people cite it in this way. It also gives you, very common, like the alerting, but it gives you this sense of, hey, based on these 600 articles, you get kind of like a weekly thing of, here's some other articles that you might want to add into that. This is kind of a cool feature too about momentum, where this is kind of an article. This black for me is about, like, the environmental impact of AI. So that's kind of what that one's kind of following. But there's this one article, for whatever reason, it's like getting cited a lot. It's having a high impact. It just came out this year. So what I'm showing with this is these types of tools are interesting to visualize different conversations where you can take a body of 600 articles and play around with them in different ways. There's a way to see, like, which of your articles are the most connected. And so, like, this one is really interesting to me because it's connected to probably about 20 other articles. But again, you see the different colors. So this one, it's hitting residential and agriculture and industry and, groundwater. It's hitting it from a lot of different ways. So that's pretty cool. I think, what I'm trying to drive at, what I'm kind of getting at is, as we think about a lot of these complex interdisciplinary problems, water scarcity, pollution, even renewables, energy, it's all over the map in terms of different disciplines. And we know this, they're very multidimensional, interdisciplinary global problems. And so I think there's been a lot of emphasis on sort of the open movement. And I think the next piece to that is like the integration movement. How do we kind of bring these things together and form these kind of connections, these constellations, these contextual, translations that are kind of happening. And, it really, I think what started me on that journey, I guess, was talking with the author of this article about glacier melt at CMU. And he was showing me like, here's all the data we're using and the models, and here's all the sources, and it's all over the place. It's not just about the melting of glaciers. It's a really complex interdisciplinary thing. And talking to his students about how do they, find literature and their struggles and triumphs too. And it just kind of came together of like, how could we package this? And so I'm still figuring this out, but I'm still testing it out maybe, but I'm trying to think about these knowledge management ecosystems like as a service. What does that mean? What does that look like? And beyond just sort of like, we do workshops. I think there's much more. What's really helped me was having a community of practice where I'm kind of doing these things. But think about it at an individual level. The obvious one is like people who are doing like research development or who are writing dissertations or things like that. But really getting into labs or centers or research teams, and even beyond that, like thinking about like the SDG, people working on SDGs, working on grand challenges, working on global problems, like being able to kind of share and pull that together. Like there's something sort of there, and a little bit of a mission statement kind of forming maybe in my head. It's an accruing. It's not official yet, but it's kind of, again, helping people organize, connect, and activate that information, their workflows, and sort of their priorities, that matter most to them. Something in that way. So just what I'm doing with all this is I have a prototype. I'm testing it in the spring. Again, it's less about is this good? Are you interested in this? But it's really more to bring in conversations of how do you do these things now? What is working? What's not working? And so forth. I'm going to bring it into the team science group in the summer to kind of finish that, and then kind of create maybe some YouTube demos of it, some documentation, and just kind of release it in the spring or the fall. And it's open source, so it's like I could give it to you in a zip file right now if you really wanted it. But the idea with that is not to just like take Brian's template and activate that, but to encourage people to make it their own and to do that. And I think the real thing I'm doing is I'm really kind of taking the template and like I'm using this to talk to people about how do you do these things? How do you do it individually, like on a grad student kind of level? But how does that fit into the lab? And what does that sort of ecosystem look like in terms of your knowledge production, if you want to use an engineering sort of term? Okay, so we got about 5 minutes. I'll do my closing here. I think just some lingering thoughts, and these are just, again, they're thoughts, they're not proclamations, I guess. But thinking about knowledge as an ecosystem has been really kind of stuck with me. And this idea that when it really thrives when it's sort of nurtured. There's a gardening aspect to it that's kind of happening where it's growing, it's evolving and connecting. That idea of the knowledge as a mirror, again, I feel like how we organize our information, I've seen this with myself, like it reveals patterns in our sort of thinking in different kind of ways. We start to connect things that we wouldn't see otherwise, which is in that knowledge and context where it reveals these hidden insights. And I think about that, all the time. I think the artistry one is a good example of that, but even being able to think about, I remember one time I had these 2 pages of notes and I couldn't, one of them was talking with someone who does digital humanities, the other one was talking with someone who deals with digital scholarship, and like, I really couldn't tell the difference because looking at it from a technical point of view, it was like the same kind of like very similar kind of challenges that we're kind of facing with like the cyber infrastructure and preservation and things like that. So it was just kind of an interesting being able to look at the context of your conversations and notes and thinking and this thing. And the last one is like that knowledge and action. So the practices and systems that we create really kind of affect the action. If I have a lot of notes that I can't read or they're just kind of sitting there and they're just they're basically non-existent in that sense. So final slide, there's a visualization, so it might not work. This is maybe not. Oh, cool. All right. So, but even though I can't read it, it's too small. So the idea here becomes like, what if we like approach our note taking with like intention and creativity, and not just like things to get done, but really thinking of them as like pathways to new possibilities. And what if like we're not just managing information, but we're like designing it for future potential? Something like that is what I'm thinking a lot about. And then again, what happens when we when we allow our notes and our thoughts and our ideas and even share those notes and thoughts and ideas with others, like we have them accrue and collide and evolve together. So that's where you land. That's where you end up, I guess. But thank you very much. I'm happy to take a question or anything like that if you want. Again, I'm happy to show you the biofuel thing, when we close down here if you want to see. Thanks.
One use case that I would suggest is thinking about research management. So the vice presidents of research, their offices, all the kind of regulations, policies, documents that are coming out, and how to organize those to be able to share with labs and understand. So there might be a kind of a compliance, policy, legal kind of things that can be brought in to a knowledge management system like this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that with the team science community. A lot of them are research developed, so it's a grant writing kind of process, and so they have pieces of that in there, but being able to put it on the compliance side, I think, is a natural partnership as well.
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
Lisa Hinchliffe, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So looking back at how many times we've been at CNI together, it's been a while.
And ARL and ACRL.
I know. So one of the things I'm curious, particularly when you were interviewing the groups, is something I have seen sort of be a challenge in teams I'm part of is now we're working together, but I love Dropbox and you love Google Drive or like whatever that is, right? And so I'm wondering how, if you saw any insights into how groups navigate to consensus on the shared tool when it's either only the preference of one, like, is it is it ultimately the person with power who wins? Is it that there's people who are more flexible in their styles and so they just flex to whatever the other, like, do you see where I'm getting at here? Because it really makes sense when you talk about the personal, where it's all this like, oh, this makes sense to me, it feels good. But like when you get to this collaborative, I'm really curious about how people's preferences also get negotiated.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think about that a lot too. And I think what I've kind of seen is it varies, but in a lot of the, I'd say very STEM focused kind of world, it tends to be like the senior postdoc or whomever kind of sets the thing. And I've seen this happen where there was someone who was there for a long time and set up a knowledge base, we'll kind of say in Notion, and then he graduated and left, and it was like, they were struggling to move things over, and then someone else was like, okay, we're moving it all to Google Docs now, and it was like, okay, that's fine, but is that where you want to be? So I think a lot of it is when I talk to more at the PI level of thinking of, is there an ecosystem we want to kind of encourage or demand at sort of the lab sort of level where we want to be able to bring in, like, not, I won't use the word compliance, but in that kind of thing of like, what's this kind of flow look like? And again, I think one of the nice things is a lot of these tools integrate a little bit more, so maybe there's some kind of play there. But I think if it's kind of like, if we're building our literature reviews, just to use that as a thing, like over time, you might have your personal Zotero, but is there a way you can share pieces of that with the lab version of that? So I think that's the thing I'm trying to use in that kind of sense of like talking to individuals, but then seeing, is there like a lab infrastructure that people can plug and play into? But it kind of exists now, but it's like you're saying, it's very ad hoc and very, it's a lot of turnover of it. And so trying to get some consistency is the thing.
Hey, hi, Constance Malthus, OCLC Research. I'm wondering if you can situate the work that you're doing and your prototyping in the larger context of infrastructure for researcher workflows. And here I'm thinking about the kind of infrastructure and the kind of ecosystem modeling of the open science framework, efforts to compose different pieces of infrastructure that can support open science practices, or on a different kind of scale, the implementation of ELMs. So it seems to me that part of the real interest to me of your work is that you're situating that knowledge work at the very front end of, I'm an inveterate note taker. So that is a practice of encoding information so that with the intent that ultimately it will shape an outcome for me.
Right.
So it feels to me like you're kind of, the work that you're doing is at the earliest stage, or it's a very particular phase in the researcher workflow. And I just wonder if you have some reflection on how you see this prototyping fitting into that broader ecosystem of adaptable infrastructure for researcher workflows?
Yeah, I think it gets back to Lisa's kind of thing too, of like, it's so, in my experience too, where I try to adapt other people's workflows and it doesn't work. Like, I have to kind of figure it out myself. So that's why I kind of feel I've done it at, again, the personal level. And I think taking it to a lab level, if you kind of have it around 10 people or less, there's something you can kind of do there. I haven't figured out that kind of piece yet, but I think I kind of want to scale it slowly in this thing. And again, I'm just trying to understand the workflows a little bit more. I think, again, being able to think at like a lab or a center kind of level to see like what can I learn about that, to see, okay, what are there other centers that are working on these kind of topics that could we network that somehow? Or there might be some things that we're doing in our center and you're doing in your center, but then could we start to share certain things? Or I don't know, I'm not there yet. It's sort of in the, like I said, the inkling of it, but I'm just trying to like take it one lab at a time right now, I guess. Yeah. Thanks. All right. I think we are at, I don't know if we're at passing break or one of these kind of situations, but thank you all for the questions. Again, reach out if you want to hear more about that.